Welcome. You're listening to a quiet horror story. A story about isolation, rules, and what happens when you believe you are in control. If you enjoy slow burn horror and unsettling rules that should never be broken, stay with me. Because some places don't forgive mistakes, they only wait for them. I found the cabin through an online listing that shouldn't have existed. There was no company name. No photos. No reviews. Just a short description. Temporary caretaker needed. Remote woodland property. 7 days. High pay. Absolute privacy. At the very bottom, one sentence stood out. You must follow all rules exactly. I should have closed the page right there. Instead, I sent an email. The reply came less than 5 minutes later. Not a greeting. Not a contract. Just a location, a date, and a warning. Arrive before sunset. Read the rules before entering. Do not improvise. The drive took almost 6 hours. The last town I passed through looked abandoned. Half the houses were empty, the gas station windows covered with old newspapers. When I stopped to ask for directions, the man behind the counter stared at me longer than necessary. Cabin in the woods? He asked quietly. I nodded. His expression changed. Don't stay out after dark, he said. Then he looked away. The road ended in a clearing surrounded by dense forest. Tall trees blocked most of the sky, their branches twisting together like they were trying to hide something underneath. The cabin stood alone. Old wood. One chimney. No lights. No noise. A metal lockbox was attached to a post near the door. Inside were 2 keys and a thick envelope with my name written on it. I didn't open it right away. First, I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The interior was simple. Too simple. A wooden table. 2 chairs. A small kitchen. A narrow hallway leading to a bedroom and bathroom. No dust. No personal items. No signs that anyone had lived there recently. On the table lay a notebook. I ignored it and opened the envelope. Rules for staying in the cabin. The paper felt old and heavy. The handwriting was neat, almost careful. I read slowly. Rule 1. You must arrive before sunset. If you arrive after sunset, do not enter the cabin. I checked my watch. 6:41 p.m. The sun was still visible. Rule 2. Lock the door immediately after entering. Do not unlock it again until morning. Rule 3. After sunset, do not open the door for anyone. No matter what they say. That line was underlined twice. Rule 4. Windows must remain covered after dark. If a curtain moves on its own, do not fix it. I paused at that one. Rule 5. The cabin may produce sounds it should not. Footsteps, breathing, or movement are common. You are alone. Do not investigate. Rule 6. Lights must be turned off by 11 p.m. You may use 1 candle. Never more than 1. Rule 7. If you hear knocking, scratching, or tapping after dark, do not respond. Silence is required. Rule 8. At exactly 2:17 a.m., you may hear your name spoken from outside. Do not answer. Do not whisper back. Do not think about the voice. My chest tightened. Rule 9. If you see someone standing between the trees, do not acknowledge them. Eye contact counts. Rule 10. If you believe you have broken a rule, remain where you are until morning. Movement attracts attention. At the bottom of the page, written smaller. These rules are not optional. I laughed. It came out sharper than I expected, echoing through the empty cabin. This is some kind of joke, I muttered. The sound of my own voice felt wrong in the space. Still, the pay was real. And I was already there. I locked the door. The sun disappeared faster than I expected. Almost immediately, the forest went silent. No birds. No insects. Just the wind brushing against the walls. At 7:09 p.m., there was a knock on the door. 3 slow taps. I froze. My eyes drifted back to the paper on the table. Do not open the door. Another knock followed. Closer this time. Then nothing. After a full minute, heavy footsteps moved away from the cabin. I didn't breathe until they were gone. At 10:59 p.m., I turned off the lights and lit a single candle. The flame barely pushed back the darkness. At exactly 11 p.m., the air inside the cabin changed. Not colder. Not warmer. Heavier. Like something had settled into place. At 2:17 a.m., my name was spoken. Calm. Clear. Familiar. From the forest. I did not answer. I spent the next morning pretending the night hadn't happened. Sunlight made the cabin look harmless again. The walls were the same rough wood. The kitchen smelled like nothing. The hallway was just a hallway. The forest outside was quiet in a normal way, full of distant birds and soft wind. I told myself the voice at 2:17 was an animal. A trick of sleep. A suggestion planted by the rules. Then I saw the marks on the door. 3 thin scratches, vertical, as if someone had dragged nails down the wood during the night. They were fresh. I stood there with my hand hovering over them, and for a moment I felt a stupid, childish urge to open the door and check the porch, like I could catch someone in the act and prove the rules were just scare tactics. I didn't. Instead, I turned away and finally opened the notebook on the table. The first page was dated, but the year had been scratched out so many times it was unreadable. The handwriting changed from entry to entry, but the pattern was the same. Someone wrote in here every day. And they all wrote like they were trying to stay calm. Day 1. Arrived before sunset. Locked the door. Heard knocking at 7:11. Ignored it. Good. Day 2. Curtain moved on its own. Did not fix it. Slept in chair. Heard footsteps in hallway. Did not investigate. Day 3. Broke rule 6. Lit 2 candles. The second flame went out by itself. Something whispered my name until morning. Day 4. Do not look outside when you hear them breathing. The entry stopped mid-sentence on one page, the pen dragging off the line like the writer's hand had slipped. I flipped forward. A new handwriting. Bolder. More aggressive. If you're reading this, you're the next idiot. I swallowed. The next line was calmer. The rules are real. They don't exist to scare you. They exist to make you predictable. If you follow them, you become boring. If you improvise, you become interesting. I read that twice. Predictable. Boring. Interesting. The word interest made my skin crawl. Below it, the writer had added their own list, separate from the official rules. Unofficial notes. 1. They don't like silence that you create. If you choose silence, it works. If you try to control the silence, it doesn't. 2. The knocking is not a person. The knocking is a question. 3. Don't check the time too often at night. You'll start losing minutes. 4. If the curtains move, it means something is close enough to touch them. 5. If you smell damp earth inside the cabin, you're already late. I sat back slowly, my chair creaking under me. The air in the cabin suddenly felt too still, like it was waiting for my reaction. I forced myself to breathe normally and close the notebook. For the first time since arriving, I felt something close to certainty. This wasn't a prank. And it wasn't aimed at tourists. It was aimed at people like me, people who needed money badly enough to ignore instinct. The instructions for the job were simple: keep the cabin clean, check the generator shed each day, and stay inside after dark. There was no electricity except what the generator could provide, and it was old enough that it complained every time I touched it. Behind the cabin, a narrow path led to a small shed half hidden by trees. I went out around noon. The forest looked harmless in daylight, but it still felt attentive. As I walked, I had the strange sensation that my footsteps were being measured. The shed door was unlocked. Inside was the generator, a stack of fuel cans, and a clipboard with a checklist. Fuel level. Oil level. Inspect cables. Confirm lock. At the bottom, someone had added one extra line in the same neat handwriting as the rules. Do not remain in the shed after you finish. I stared at that sentence for a long time. Then I did what the sentence clearly expected. I finished quickly. And I left. The rest of the day passed in uneasy calm. I kept the curtains open. I cooked a simple meal. I tried to distract myself with my phone, but there was no signal, no internet, nothing to scroll, no noise to fill my head. At 6:30 p.m. the light started fading again, and my stomach tightened like I was preparing for something physical. By 6:50, I was standing by the door. I checked the lockbox outside through the window. It was still there. That shouldn't have mattered. But it did. At 7:10 p.m., the knocking came. 3 taps. I didn't move. Then the tapping changed. It wasn't a knock anymore. It was fingernails. Slow scratching, like someone was writing on the wood. I stared at the door, frozen in place, as the sound continued for nearly 30 seconds. Then it stopped. A pause. And a voice spoke, low and close to the door. I know you're awake. My throat went dry. I didn't answer. The voice sighed, not angrily, not impatiently, just amused. Good, it whispered. You learned that part. Footsteps moved away from the porch. Not heavy footsteps like last time. Light ones. There. Like someone walking without shoes. At 10:59 p.m., I turned off the lights. 1 candle. I sat at the table with the notebook closed in front of me like it could protect me. At 2:16 a.m., I made a mistake. A small one. The kind you don't notice until it's already done. I checked the time again. 2:16. I stared at the numbers, waiting. 2:17. My name was spoken from outside. Calm. Familiar. And this time it didn't come from the forest. It came from the window. Right beside my head. I did not answer. But my eyes moved on their own. Just slightly. Not enough to look outside. Enough to look at the curtain. The curtain was moving. As if someone's fingers were gently pulling it aside. I don't know how long I sat there after the curtain moved. Time didn't feel reliable anymore. The candle burned lower, the flame bending slightly toward the window, even though there was no draft. I forced my eyes away and focused on breathing, slow and deliberate, like the notebook suggested. Silence you choose is safe. Silence you try to control is not. The curtain stopped moving on its own. That was worse. Because something had decided it didn't need to hide anymore. Morning came in pieces. I remember the candle burning out. I remember sitting in darkness, afraid to move. I remember falling asleep without realizing it. When I woke up, sunlight filled the cabin, and for a brief, dangerous moment, everything felt normal. Then I stood up. The floor creaked behind me. 1 step. Not mine. I froze. The sound didn't repeat. I waited a full minute before turning around. Nothing. The hallway was empty. Still, I didn't relax. Rule 5 echoed in my head. Footsteps are common. You are alone. Do not investigate. I hadn't investigated. I had just stood up. And yet my hands were shaking. I checked the notebook again. New writing had appeared. I was certain the page had been blank the night before. The handwriting was neat. Familiar. Not the aggressive writer. Not the careful one. This one looked like mine. Day 2, addendum. You reacted faster than most. That's good. But you are thinking too much. Thinking makes patterns. Patterns make doors. I flipped the page in panic. Another entry. If the rules contradict each other, obey the oldest rule. If you don't know which rule is older, stay still. I slammed the notebook shut. That wasn't there before. Someone, or something, was updating the rules. I decided to leave the cabin during daylight. Not to run. Not to escape. Just to confirm the forest was still normal. The path behind the cabin looked unchanged, but the trees felt closer than yesterday, their branches stretching slightly farther over the clearing. I told myself it was my imagination, but the feeling of being watched followed me with every step. I didn't go far. 10 meters into the forest, I noticed something nailed to a tree. A small wooden plaque. Weathered. Carved by hand. It read, "You are doing well." Below it, another plaque had been added, newer, "The wood lighter. Do not try to do better." My stomach dropped. I backed away slowly and returned to the cabin without turning my back on the trees. That afternoon, the cabin started doing things that weren't covered by the rules. The sink dripped, even though the handle was tight. The bedroom door opened and closed by itself, slowly, like someone testing the hinges. Once, I heard breathing behind me and felt warm air brush my neck. I did not react. I did not investigate. I did exactly what the rules demanded. And that was when I realized something was wrong. The more I followed the rules, the more interested the cabin became. At sunset, I locked the door. I covered the windows. At 7:10 p.m., the knocking came again. This time, it didn't stop. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. Over and over. I stayed silent. Minutes passed. The knocking grew faster. Angrier. Then it changed. A voice began reading. Not speaking. Reading. It was reciting the rules. Rule 1. Rule 2. Rule 3. The voice stumbled over the words like it was learning them for the first time. By Rule 6, it sounded frustrated. By Rule 8, it sounded angry. "You listen too well," it said suddenly. "That makes you boring." The knocking stopped. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The voice sighed. "Let's try something else." At 10:59 p.m., I turned off the lights. I lit one candle. The flame flickered violently, stretching toward the hallway. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Not careful this time. Not slow. Running. Something sprinted down the hallway, stopped inches from the table, and exhaled hard. Right into my face. The smell of damp earth filled the cabin. Rule from the notebook flashed in my head. If you smell damp earth inside the cabin, you're already late. The candle went out. Darkness swallowed everything. I stayed perfectly still. Seconds passed. Then minutes. Then a whisper came from somewhere close. "You missed one." I didn't answer. "You checked the time again." Cold fingers brushed my wrist. I almost screamed. Almost. Instead, I froze harder, locking my body in place like I could become furniture if I tried hard enough. The fingers withdrew. The cabin went silent. At 2:17 a.m., no one called my name. That terrified me more than when they did. Because something else happened instead. The rules began whispering to each other. Not aloud. Inside my head. Contradicting. Repeating. Overlapping. Stay still. Move now. Ignore it. Look. I pressed my hands over my ears. That was a mistake. Because when I closed my eyes, I saw the cabin the way it wanted me to see it. Full. Not empty. Occupied. By shapes that wore familiar outlines but never stayed solid long enough to understand. One of them leaned close and smiled with my mouth. "You're almost interesting," it said. When morning finally came, the notebook lay open on the table. A new line had been added. Day 3. Subject shows signs of adaptation. Escalation approved. I stopped trusting the morning. Daylight no longer felt like safety. It felt like permission. Permission for the cabin to prepare. The notebook lay open on the table when I woke up, exactly where I was certain I had closed it the night before. I didn't touch it at first. I just stood there, staring at the last line. Escalation approved. Approved by who? Or what? I flipped the page with 2 fingers, careful not to let my skin linger on the paper. The handwriting had changed again. This one was precise. Clinical. Observation log, day 3. Compliance rate, high. Curiosity level, increasing. Fear response, controlled. Subject follows rules instinctively. Subject hesitates when rules conflict. Next phase recommended. My mouth went dry. This wasn't a diary anymore. It was a report. About me. I didn't leave the cabin that day. Not even at noon. The forest outside felt closer than ever, the trees leaning inward like an audience waiting for the next act. Every time the wind shifted, branches brushed against the walls, not randomly, but deliberately, as if testing the structure. Inside, the cabin had started rearranging itself. Not physically. Conceptually. Rooms felt longer when I walked through them. Corners lingered in my peripheral vision. Once, I reached the bedroom door and realized I had been walking for far too long to still be inside such a small space. When I turned around, I was back in the kitchen. The candle sat unlit on the table. Waiting. I checked the rules again. They hadn't changed. That was worse. Because the cabin had. At 4:32 p.m., the first contradiction appeared. I heard footsteps in the hallway. Rule 5 told me not to investigate. But Rule 11 told me to remain where I was if I believed I had broken a rule. Had I broken one? I didn't know. I stayed seated. The footsteps stopped behind me. Something leaned close to my ear. "You're learning," it whispered. Its voice wasn't trying to scare me anymore. It sounded pleased. At sunset, the forest went quiet faster than before. I locked the door. I covered the windows. I followed every instruction with mechanical precision. At 7:10 p.m., there was no knocking. Instead, the handle turned. Slowly. Once. Twice. Then stopped. A new sound followed. Scratching. Not at the door. At the walls. All around the cabin. Dozens of nails dragged across wood, circling, overlapping, testing every surface. I sat at the table with my hands folded, staring at the candle, repeating the rules in my head like a prayer. Do not respond. Do not investigate. Do not acknowledge. The scratching went on for nearly an hour. Then it stopped all at once. The silence that followed was unbearable. At 10:59 p.m., I turned off the lights. One candle. The flame burned steady this time. Too steady. At 11:03 p.m., someone sat down in the chair across from me. The chair creaked under the weight. I did not look up. I did not react. "You're doing very well," a voice said. It sounded like the man from the gas station. "You didn't run. Most do." The candle flame bent sideways, casting a long shadow across the table. "I don't think you understand the purpose of this place," the voice continued. "The rules aren't there to protect you." I clenched my jaw. "They're there to shape you." The chair scraped softly against the floor. The weight lifted. When I finally looked up, the chair was empty. But the notebook was open again. A new rule had been written. Rule 12. If you are spoken to directly after dark, do not reply. Acknowledgement encourages progression. I felt sick. They were adding rules mid-experiment. At 2:14 a.m., something new happened. The cabin breathed. Not metaphorically. The walls expanded slightly, then contracted, like lungs drawing in air. The floor vibrated beneath my feet, and for the first time since arriving, I felt the cabin wasn't just observing me. It was adjusting. At 2:17 a.m., my name wasn't called. Instead, every rule was spoken at once. Whispered from every surface. Overlapping. Contradicting. Demanding. I dropped to my knees, pressing my forehead to the floor, trying to become as small and uninteresting as possible. That was when I felt hands on my shoulders. Gentle. Almost kind. "You've reached the threshold," a voice said. "Now comes the choice." I didn't ask what choice. I already knew. The notebook slid across the floor in front of me. It opened to a blank page. A pen rolled to a stop beside it. The voice leaned close. "Write the next rule," it said. "Or become part of the cabin." The candle went out. Darkness closed in. And something waited for my answer. I stared at the blank page until the darkness felt like it was pressing against my eyes. The pen lay beside the notebook, perfectly still. Waiting like a key you only get once. The hands on my shoulders didn't squeeze. They didn't pull. They just stayed there, light as a reminder. I could feel whoever it was breathing, slow and patient, like they had all the time in the world. Maybe they did. "Write it," the voice said again. "You've earned the privilege." Privilege. That word made me want to vomit. I swallowed hard, and my fingers reached for the pen before my mind could argue. The moment I touched it, the cabin reacted. The floor stopped vibrating. The air became sharper. The silence turned attentive, like a room full of people holding their breath. A single thought pushed through the noise in my head. Not a voice. Not a whisper. My own instinct, clean and sudden. If you write the rule, you become part of this place. The pen felt warm in my hand. I lowered it to the paper. Then I stopped. The hands on my shoulders grew heavier. Not by much. Just enough. A pressure. Encouragement. Interest. I remembered the notebook's note from earlier. If you follow them, you become boring. If you improvise, you become interesting. Maybe interesting wasn't what they wanted. Maybe interesting was what they needed. Something to replace the last person. I set the pen down. The hands tightened. Not painful, but firm. The voice sighed, almost disappointed. Still resisting, it said. "That's fine. We can teach you." The cabin shifted. The hallway stretched, longer than it should be. The darkness inside it looked deeper, thicker, like it was made of something you could drown in. Then, from the hallway, I heard footsteps. Many footsteps. Bare feet on wood. Soft, synchronized. Coming toward me. Rule 11 echoed in my mind. Remain where you are until morning. Movement attracts attention. But morning was a concept here, not a guarantee. And I understood something that made my blood run cold. They weren't waiting for me to make the right choice. They were waiting for me to make any choice. Because a choice meant I was participating. I looked down at the notebook again. Blank page. Pen. A trap disguised as control. My gaze drifted to the open kitchen drawer where I'd seen a small utility knife earlier, used for cutting twine and packaging. I hadn't touched it. I hadn't needed it. Now, I did. Slowly, carefully, I reached for it. The hands on my shoulders vanished the moment my fingers touched the handle, as if the cabin didn't want to be blamed for what came next. I pulled the knife out and held it above the notebook. The footsteps in the hallway stopped. Silence. Then a whisper brushed my ear. That's not a rule. Then watch, I said. It was the first time I had spoken after dark. The cabin seemed to lean in. The air tightened. The darkness waited, pleased, like it had finally pulled a reaction out of me. Maybe that was another mistake. But I didn't stop. I drove the knife into the notebook. The blade punched through paper with a dull, wet sound. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the cabin screamed. Not with a voice. With structure. The walls groaned. The floor buckled. The hallway snapped back to its correct length like a rubber band released. Wind exploded through the cabin, tearing at the curtains, rattling the windows like fists. The notebook thrashed under the knife as if it were alive. I held it down with both hands, forcing the blade deeper, tearing through page after page until the binding split. The screaming intensified. Then, abruptly, it stopped. The cabin went still. Too still. The kind of stillness that comes after something dies. My breathing sounded loud. Ugly. I looked around. The candle on the table had relit itself. One steady flame. The notebook lay ruined, its pages scattered like dead leaves across the floor. And in the sudden quiet, I heard a sound from outside. Birds. Real birds. Distant, ordinary, unconcerned. Sunlight touched the edge of the window. Morning. I didn't move for a long time, afraid it was another trick. But the air had changed. It was lighter. Normal. Forgiving. I stood, legs shaking, and walked to the door. My hand hovered over the lock. Rule 2 said not to unlock it until morning. It was morning. I slid the bolt. The door opened easily. No resistance. No weight on the other side. Outside, the forest looked like a forest again. Trees. Wind. Light. The clearing unchanged. But something was different. On the ground in front of the porch, the dirt had been disturbed as if many feet had stood there overnight. And in the center of the disturbed soil was a single object. A wooden plaque. Freshly carved. It read, "New rule." My stomach turned. Below it, a second line had been scratched in hurried, violent strokes. You can't destroy the rules. You can only move them. I stepped back. The plaque wasn't there yesterday. I knew it in my bones. I looked down at my hands. Ink stained my fingers. Not from writing. From touching the torn pages. From fighting the notebook. My palms were black with it. And beneath the ink, faintly, as if the skin itself had learned something, there were words. Letters pressed into my flesh like a brand. A sentence, upside down, written across my left palm. I raised it closer to my face and read it. Rule 1, you must arrive before sunset. My throat tightened. That was the first rule. The oldest. I turned my hand slightly and saw more letters, faint but present. Not carved, not inked. Imprinted. A rulebook under my skin. I backed into the cabin, heart pounding, and slammed the door shut. The moment it closed, the air inside grew heavier again. Not as heavy as before. But enough. Enough to remind me that this place wasn't finished with me. The candle flickered. The notebook pages on the floor rustled as if caught in a wind that didn't exist. And from somewhere deep in the cabin, not the hallway, not the bedroom, but somewhere that felt underneath the floorboards, a voice whispered softly. Not my name. Not a rule. A simple invitation. Caretaker, it said. Right. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, tell me which rule scared you the most, and what you would have done in that final moment. If you want more quiet horror like this, support the channel with a like, a comment, or a subscribe. It helps more than you think. And remember, some places don't let you leave. They just let you think you did.